The clock ticks for planet Earth. Can COP26 deliver? From the forest fires of California to the melting polar ice caps to rising sea levels and fatal flooding, the message on day one: it's time.
It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now.
The people most affected by climate change are no longer some imagined future generation, but young people alive today.
It's the biggest ever gathering of world leaders in the UK at a turning point for humanity. But absent, the world's biggest emitter, China. No President Putin either. So what hope of real progress on climate change? The royals rally to the cause. The Queen sends her heartfelt message.
It has sometimes been observed that what leaders do for their people today is government and politics. But what they do for the people of tomorrow, that is statesmanship.
Breaking tonight, Robert, on a big announcement from 100 countries tomorrow to reverse deforestation by 2030.
Change is not going to come from inside there. That is not leadership. This is leadership.
Outside the conference, Greta Thunberg leads protesters and is excoriating about the efforts inside. The reality of the challenge faced. John is in South Africa, where coal is still king. And one other big story, a last-minute reprieve in the fishing row with France. James will have the details from Boulogne.
From Glasgow, this is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening from Glasgow, from the heart of the COP26 conference, where Britain has invited leaders from right around the planet to find a way to save it and fast. Just behind us here, the room where more than 100 world leaders gathered for this morning's opening ceremony, and one stirring speech followed another. Passion punctured the politics, yes, from heads of government, but also from campaigners, young, and in the case of Sir David Attenborough, the young at heart too. It was here that the Prime Minister described the world ticking down to destruction as in a James Bond film. But this, he said, was no movie. Indeed, there were no Bond-style villains, but no real heroes either here today. India did set a target for net zero carbon emissions, but not until 2070, far later than Mr Johnson had hoped. 30,000 delegates are here and 120 world leaders. They and international business bosses, some of them have arrived on 400 private flights, as speaker after speaker made clear the future of the planet for our children and our children's children rests in their hands.
It was a friendly start to COP26 for Boris Johnson, bumping elbows with the leaders of the US, Australia, India. All smiles perhaps, but with a critical need to wrap up a deal in Glasgow if there is any hope of securing action to slow climate change. Inside, thousands of delegates, and walking among them, world leaders, including from France, the Netherlands.
I'm mildly optimistic. I hope we will move from the blah 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 to the actions.
Denmark.
I think it is a problem that China is not attending this meeting.
Why aren't you doing more?
But Australia's Scott Morrison not saying a word. Then, in a huge room, a gathering of immense power, with the weight of the world on their shoulders, in the face of a darkening threat, shown to them in a stark video.
Periods of early frost, the frequency of hurricanes.
Those who could hold the key to the solution watching on in shock.
It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now. If we don't get serious about climate change today, it will be too late for our children to do so tomorrow.
Already too late for this climate activist from Kenya who looked world leaders in the eye as she described what's happening 7,000 miles away.
Our animals and people are dying. I have seen with my own eyes 3 young children crying at the side of a dried-up river after walking 12 miles with their mother to find water.
Then Sir David Attenborough took to the stage, placing record levels of carbon dioxide into historical perspective and telling those present they could stop the downward spiral of climate change.
In my lifetime, I've witnessed a terrible decline. In yours, you could and should witness a wonderful recovery. That desperate hope, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, excellency, is why the world is looking to you.
Outside the hall, he made the point in a different way. How worried are you about success?
Sorry. There he goes. That's what I do.
Praying. Some parts of the world need those prayers answered now, like Bangladesh, where villagers were forced out of their homes just last month by rising sea levels, a reality felt by the country's foreign minister.
They say that in next 30 years, 25% of Bangladesh will go underwater. The big countries should learn probably from Bangladesh, because in our NDC, we have announced that we will do away with 10 coal-based power plants. I mean, that's a huge commitment for a country like Bangladesh, who is energy hungry.
The big countries again. Back in the hall, the Chinese president, a no-show. The American understanding the scale.
This is the challenge of our collective lifetimes.
But does he have the political drive to see it through? And the Indian Prime Minister, promising half of the country's power would come from renewables by 2030 in an improved short-term climate plan, and pledging net zero by 2070.
ITV News. Do you think India's doing enough?
And there it was again. He and the rest of the world hoping that it will be enough. Anushka Astana, News at 10.
Well, the Queen, as we know, can't be here, but her recorded message this evening to other world leaders was both rousing and touching. She told them what they do for their people in the present is government and politics. What they do for the people of tomorrow, that is statesmanship. The time for words is over, she said. It is time for action. She spoke of her pride that her husband, Prince Philip, had championed the environment for more than half a century, and that her son, Prince Charles, and grandson, Prince William, were now doing the same.
The delegation of royals at COP26 is a substantial one, but at the evening reception tonight there was one notable absentee, the Queen, who was scheduled to be here but pulled out last week on medical advice. Instead, she recorded a video message and told leaders they would be judged by history.
None of us underestimates the challenges ahead, but history has shown that when nations come together in common cause, there is always room for hope.
Presidents and prime ministers were watching as this head of state spoke about the leaders she had observed for generations.
It has sometimes been observed that what leaders do for their people today is government and politics. But what they do for the people of tomorrow, that is statesmanship.
The Queen was seen driving today at Windsor. Doctors have limited her to light duties, but her message to delegates in Glasgow was that these decisions are not about them.
We none of us will live forever. But we are doing this not for ourselves, but for our children and our children's children, and those who will follow in their footsteps.
On the table behind her was a photograph of Prince Philip.
The impact of the environment on human progress was a subject close to the heart of my dear late husband, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. The leading role my husband played in encouraging people to protect our fragile planet lives on through the work of our eldest son, Charles, and his eldest son, William. I could not be more proud of them.
Her grandson, Prince William, arrived with Kate in Glasgow earlier by train, then electric car. This was, of course, no time to be using helicopters. They were with a scout group a couple of miles from the conference centre where the Cambridges scattered wildflower seeds. Inside the conference, meanwhile, the family pressure continued. Prince Charles's walk onto the main stage faltered a little, but his message to the world leaders did not.
The cost of inaction is far greater than the cost of prevention. So I can only urge you to find practical ways of overcoming differences to rescue this precious planet and save the threatened future of our young people.
There could not have been a more coordinated approach from the royals here. We won't know for some days yet what impact they've had. Chris Ship, News at 10, Glasgow.
Well, there is due to be quite a significant breakthrough here tomorrow. More than 100 world leaders will agree to reverse deforestation, including Brazil, Russia, Canada and Indonesia. Within 10 years, they'll get international help to pay for it. Robert, who's got the story, can tell us some more detail on this tonight. Sounds like we've got a bit of progress on day one.
Yeah, so this is, I think, a significant achievement of this conference, and the reason I think it's credible is because these promises made by world leaders are matched by financial help, something like 9 billion quid of help from public funds, 5 or 6 billion from private sources, so that those countries which are promising to end deforestation, indeed to start to reverse it by 2030, can, we hope, be relied upon to actually do that. Now, there will be scepticism, because, for example, we've all seen those terrible pictures of, for example, the rainforests in Brazil being mown down, and we've heard the kind of things that, for example, President Bolsonaro has said, Brazilian leader, refusing to give any guarantees that he won't stop this desecration of, well, what many people refer to as the lungs of the planet, because trees are the best natural defence against global warming, because, as you know, every school kid learns, it is trees that absorb CO2, and the more trees that we lose, the harder the challenge is to limit global warming. Now, it does seem to me that here we are seeing the beginnings of a credible strategy that might, when the second week of these talks comes to an end, might lead us to think, well, actually, we have done a significant amount to limit global warming. Not enough. I do not believe that we will get to next Friday or next Saturday when we get the conclusions, and that we will be absolutely confident we're limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. But if we can just push down how much we're warming a bit, then optimism will increase that more will be able to be done in the years ahead.
OK, Robert, for the moment, thanks. I know we'll talk to you again a bit later on. Thank you very much indeed for that. With problems, though, getting his own climate policy through Congress, President Biden's speech was perhaps more measured than some. There is no more time to sit back, he said. And Mr Biden apologised for the environmental policies of his predecessor, President Trump. Well, Emma's travelling with President Biden's delegation, so is in Edinburgh, where he is staying. Hi, Emma. Biden's speech delivered a sort of vision for the world, but the big question is whether he can actually sell his vision back home.
Well, indeed, he said that this was a decisive decade for politicians to really act. But the reality is he doesn't have a decade. He's got a real problem in the coming weeks, because in order to deliver on any of these pledges that he made today, he needs to pass his infrastructure bill and his social spending bill, because that is where the money is going to come from. At the moment, he's standing on that stage saying that America is back, he's a global leader, but he can't even lead his own party to consensus. He's trying to sell it on the global stage as America's trying to step away from fossil fuels and dirty power, and persuade a domestic audience that in doing that they can create jobs in clean energy, but that's just not resonating. And then, of course, politicians do know that people doubt their words, so they say, well, judge us on our actions. But look at what's happened in the last few days. President Biden going to a conference summit at the Vatican in a convoy of 85 cars. They're here in Scotland again now. It's not just the optics of that look bad.
Emma, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, as we've heard, President Xi of China, like President Putin of Russia, two major polluting nations, are not here. China did put out a statement restating its existing climate targets. Debbie is in Beijing for us tonight. President Xi not here tonight, clearly. Debbie, what difference does that really make? There are a lot who are very concerned about that absence.
Well, Julie, I think that statement submitted to the conference tells us all that we need to know. He spoke about the need for global cooperation and intensified action, but he's not even there in Glasgow to show his willingness to cooperate or negotiate on any tougher action. The President would be there in Scotland if China was preparing to make any new sweeping commitments. As it is, it looks like he believes the country's current targets are ambitious enough. China has signed up to that deforestation agreement agreement that Robert was just detailing, but it is, of course, on coal that the world hoped that she would go further, and that's now going to make it much harder to get other countries to take the kind of drastic measures we know are required. His absence also sends the signal that he doesn't feel the need to be there for this global photo opportunity or to be elbow pumping with other world leaders to show how they're going to save the planet. It was hoped President Xi would attend, then we thought he would give a video address, then it was delegated to a written statement online. That really sets the tone for China hopes at this COP before it's even begun.
Debbie, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, most climate change activists will not see the inside of this convention centre, but they are making their voices heard around the city, with Greta Thunberg at the forefront.
The most famous climate protester in the world, Greta Thunberg could have been posing for selfies with prime ministers and presidents. Instead, she was in a park in one of the poorest parts of Glasgow.
Inside COP, they're just politicians and people in power pretending to take our future seriously, pretending to take the present seriously of the people who are being affected already today by the climate crisis. Change is not going to come from inside there. That is not leadership. This is leadership. This is what leadership looks like.
This was just across the river from world leaders, but a long way from the slick PR of a UN conference.
They have led us nowhere.
When she speaks, this Swedish teenager attracts as much attention as any world leader.
No more blah, blah, blah. No more blah, blah, blah.
But after the slogans, she didn't want to answer any questions.
Greta, the whole world's listening. What are you saying?
Please, no saying, please leave us alone.
Simply being here, she has mobilised the new generation who are trying hard to be heard.
So often the most important voices and the most harmed voices are kept out of these big conferences in this way. And what we need to do is not just focus on kind of the official government things, but also focus on what our community's doing, what other groups doing.
Greta brings the limelight to her cause but doesn't appear to relish it. She left hiding from cameras and questions in the back of a transit van. Diesel, if you're wondering. Peter Smith, News at 10, Glasgow.
Well, the United Nations has set out 4 main aims for the conference: for the whole planet to be net zero by 2050, eliminating as much greenhouse gases as it is producing, and keeping the rise in temperature to 1.5 degrees to avoid worse droughts and floods and rising sea levels. Protect communities and natural habitats most at risk of climate change. Developed countries must fulfil their promises to make $100 billion available every year to developing countries to achieve net zero and protect lives and livelihoods. And countries must act together. It won't work if some act and others don't. Well, here in Scotland, work has already begun to switch Aberdeen, the oil capital of Europe, to renewable energy, and with good reason. 40 miles down the coast from Aberdeen is one of climate change's many front lines.
150 miles northeast of Glasgow lies a city whose wealth depends on gas and oil, the very stuff COP26 must persuade the world to leave behind. But Aberdeen's already turning away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy, building a new harbour to serve vast floating wind farms.
Aberdeen has become the centre of excellence for offshore engineering and offshore work more generally, and a lot of the skills that have been developed and finessed over the last 50 years are transferable onto the renewable sector.
On the other side of the city, helicopters ferry oil workers to and from the rigs. 40,000 jobs here still rely on the oil and gas industry, and those just starting out in it know they'll have to stay nimble.
I feel if you work offshore, you could really go anywhere. Most companies are doing renewables now, so if you were looking, I think you'd get the help you need.
But the talk away from the cameras at a nearby pub among his older colleagues is more pessimistic. There's a fear some will be left behind.
Currently, our offshore oil and gas workers are thousands of pounds out of pocket, investing in training they're not sure they actually need. But at the same time, it is unrealistic to expect the same level of salaries as the oil and gas used to provide.
The task of protecting both livelihoods and the planet while keeping the lights on, as unforgiving as the sea itself.
As COP host, the UK has to lead by example, and it was the first major economy to commit to reducing its carbon emissions to net zero. But despite that, the government is still licensing gas and oil fields here in the North Sea. And that's not a great look for a country trying to persuade others to reduce their emissions quickly.
And just down the coast at Montrose is a reminder of what will be lost if COP can't put the world on a path to net zero in time. The Scottish Government is spending £12 million preventing coastal erosion. But the dunes that offer communities like this flood protection can only hold back so much.
If you look back over 130 years, it used to change at about 15 centimetres a year, not a lot. It's now moving back at about 2.5 metres a year, which is huge in comparison. By the end of the century, in a high emissions scenario, it could be as high as 4 metres a year. And that's why the work at COP is absolutely vital.
In this corner of Scotland, they have both the skills and practical solutions needed to adapt, but only political will can really turn the tide. Rachel Younger, News at 10.
Well, affecting change from fossil fuels to renewables is a big ask for any country. For those like South Africa, where coal is king and the source of almost all its power, the only possible way they can make the switch is with international funding. But the country's biggest power company has a reputation for money disappearing.
When it comes to global energy providers, there are few dirtier words than Eskom. The coal-fired power stations operated by the South African giant pump out so much sulfur dioxide that Eskom has been labelled the world's most polluting power company. To the naked eye, it seems not much is coming out of the two tall chimneys, but images from a gas monitoring camera tell a different story. The coal from neighbouring mines is driven to the plants in trucks that each carry 30 tonnes. Some of the power stations use 60 truckloads of coal every hour. Eskom provides 97% of South Africa's electricity. It's the sort of market share that should generate huge profits. But unfortunately, because of corruption and mismanagement on an epic scale, the company is actually in debt to the tune of $27 billion. Now Eskom's boss is in Glasgow trying to borrow up to $35 billion to finance the switch from coal to renewables. Unfortunately, your company has a history of squandering billions of dollars. Why should lenders around the world trust you with billions more?
That's absolutely a relevant question given our history of state capture and corruption, and we acknowledge that. We have therefore assured lenders from the word go that we are very keen to have exceptionally tight governance principles in place.
At one stage, our video link interview with the man responsible for South Africa's electricity was interrupted by a power cut here in Johannesburg. When we got him back, he smiled at the irony of it. Eskom wanted to give us a glimpse of the better future they have planned. This power station used to have 9 coal-fired boilers. The last one still operating is due to shut down next year and the site converted into a renewable energy source.
I will be excited to be part of that new Eskom, as it will turn out to be.
And part of a new South Africa, maybe.
Absolutely, you know, green.
The transition to green energy can't happen quickly enough for the township of Pola, which is threatened by a slag heap because it's surrounded by coal mines and power stations. Environmentalists say the air quality here is among the worst in the world.
It's like living in hell. Our health is not considered.
Our kids are struggling, they are sick, and in this community, we feel that all the mines and power stations are failing us.
Another problem is that coal provides much of South Africa's wealth, so ending dependency on the environmentally destructive risks being economically destructive. It's far from phased out yet. John Irvine, News at 10, Johannesburg.
Well, the Archbishop of Canterbury is here at the conference, putting, he says, the moral case for cutting greenhouse gases because of the impact on climate change on the poorest in the world. I spoke to him earlier. He also told me the government should reverse the announcement in the budget last week, which makes domestic flights cheaper. But he's had to apologise too for what he said in an earlier interview about leaders being cursed if they don't reach an agreement here. Failing to do so, he suggested, would be possibly more grave than leaders who ignored warnings about the Nazis in the 30s. So when I met him this afternoon, I began by asking about that. You've compared this moment of potential failure alongside those who failed to act ahead of the Second World War against the Nazis. These are extremely strong terms you're using here.
They're extremely strong terms. I expect I will get criticised for that very significantly. I think I already am. But the reality is that in the 30s you could stop something before it resulted in a war that killed 40 million people. We know what is happening. There is no question the climate is changing. We know it's already driving conflict, starvation, crop change, flooding, cyclones. It's driving people movement, which will cause more conflict. We know that. That's a given. The question is, are we willing to tackle that?
The Prime Minister has characterised this moment as 1 minute to midnight. How would you characterise it?
I think the clock has run out. The question is, can we begin to reverse it? Can we deal with the impact of what's already happened and ensure that it doesn't go significantly further?
What hope do you have when we've just witnessed G20, when the richest countries on the planet couldn't even commit to stopping domestic coal production?
I have hope because I believe in God. And I believe that God is in the end in charge of all that happens.
What's reality telling you?
Reality is telling me that we are going to go back to some words from a politician of the 50s. We're going to have to fight and fight again to get these agreements.
We've just seen a government put out a budget where they've made internal domestic flights cheaper. Is this a green government, do you think?
I'm not capable of saying it's a green government or not.
Well, what did you think when you heard those policies being
I
used?
thought that was unusual when you're about to lead a major climate conference. I would say I hope it's something that's reversed before too long.
At this moment, with the conference in front of us, what does success look like and what failure do you fear?
Success comes in commitment of money, commitment of action, commitment of will, clear, measurable targets that are shameful if you don't meet them. What do I fear? Fudge. And I fear that the best becomes the enemy of the good. We need to achieve as much as we can and then press on.
The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, talking to me earlier this afternoon. And for everything that has happened at the Climate Summit, just head to our website. Now to the latest on the cross-channel fishing row. And after the Prime Minister and President Macron spent another day at the same event, it seems France has agreed to carry on talking. The French have stepped back from blocking British boats from landing their catch. For us this evening, some progress. James, what happened?
Well, there has been some progress, as you say, but it's not a resolution. It's more of a de-escalation. Within about half an hour, they were going to stop fishing boats, British fishing boats, from landing their catches here in Boulogne and other French ports, and they were going to impose enhanced custom checks on all cross-channel trade, which was going to be very ugly very, very quickly. Well, it seems, as you say, they have stepped back slightly. President Macron saying, look, they were talking all day today, they will talk again tomorrow, and we won't take action while they're talking. The French have put some proposals to the British. They await the response. The British, one official said they are in solutions mode, that they are prepared to look at evidence for historic French fishing rights around Jersey for small boats. That's all that this is all about. So a significant improvement in tone from some of the rhetoric over the weekend. David Frost, Britain's Europe Minister, will speak to his French counterpart Clément Beaune in Paris on Thursday. So it looks like this is off for this week at least. We'll see whether they can sort it out in the longer term.
OK, James, thank you very much indeed for that. There has been a significant change in the explanation for yesterday evening's train crash outside Salisbury Station. There was no object on the line. The second train hit the first in a matter of seconds, not minutes, as was first thought, and it was following the first train, not heading towards it. One of the train drivers has suffered injuries that are said to be life-changing. The main line through Salisbury won't reopen for several days. Well, let's return to day one of COP26 now. And Robert has joined me again for some final thoughts. Bit of a scrum getting in here this morning to start off with. And it is only day one. Yeah. Give us your up-sum, Robert.
So, this matters so much that I am desperately trying to see the positive, and there was a bit of positive news today when India revealed that it was setting a target that half of its energy needs would come from renewables by 2030. But, and I'm afraid there is a but, they didn't set a date for phasing out their use of coal-fired power stations, which do so much damage in terms of global warming, and they haven't even ruled out building significant numbers of new ones. And as you heard from Newscaster earlier on, they've also said that their target for eliminating net emissions of greenhouse gases is 2070, which is 20 or possibly even 30 years too late. But I talked to you earlier about this groundbreaking deal on trees, and I think there will be more good news to come. India may be disappointing on coal. I think there is a good chance that later this week there will be a deal with South Africa for South Africa to phase out its very dirty and very old coal-fired power stations. And I think the significance of the South African deal is it will be made possible because the rich Western countries will be providing cash loans to South Africa to help them make the adaptation. And this could be a really important model for how we keep the show on the road, for how we get to a situation where, we can absolutely be confident that we are limiting global warming to that 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, which almost all scientists say we need to do to avoid catastrophe. And so I think there'll be an enormous amount of focus on this issue of money from the rich West to be funneled to the poorer nations. And after all, many would say that is our moral obligation. We got rich, places like the UK and the US and most of Europe, by generating all this CO2, and some of that wealth now has to go to the poorer countries to help them to green their economies.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed for that. Lots more to come, of course. Now, if hope alone were enough to power the politicians into protecting the planet, then the conference wouldn't need 2 weeks to work things out. It is there in the fresh-faced appeals of young speakers here and in the poem at the opening ceremony this morning. It came from poet Yersa Daly Ward. Now is all we have left, she told delegates. Earth is talking to you today, she said. We'll be reporting over the next 2 weeks on whether they are listening. For now, from all of us here, good night.
Nothing will be saved without you. It is important to begin with the fact. This is your invitation to lead with light. You were born to be creators of the ground entrusted. Now is all we have left, holding the world in our hands, with the most inconvenient truth to honor the earth, land, sky. The staggering state of play is leaning upon you. The hour that you stand in is goldening, already coppering, already fire. Ancestors of tomorrow, this is an intervention. Earth is talking to you today, and Earth has plenty to say. Be architects of something new, protectors of the day. Be shining final hopes, designers of chance and change. The hour is crimson, turning, turning. The hour is bruising, bluing, blue. We are human, and we owe our home. Let's pay our home dues. These are the implications, so we have to end with the facts. Anything less than your best is too much to pay. Anything later than now is too little, too late. Nothing will change without you.